This video will explain a little bit about the well-known musical symbols you see here, which you probably already know are called a sharp, a flat, or a natural. They can also be called accidentals, and when they are placed before a note, accidentals are used to change the pitch of that note, most often by 1/2 step. For example, let's examine this A note. Since it is a plain old A note, it could also be called A natural. If I were to lower that note by 1/2 step, in other words, by 1 key, I have flatted that note, and I am now playing A flat. If I were to return the note to A natural, I would place a natural symbol in front of that note, and I have raised it back 1/2 step. Now, if I were to raise that A note by 1/2 step, in other words, 1 key, I have sharped the note, and the sharp symbol before the A note tells you to raise that A note by 1/2 step to A sharp. So these then are the 3 most commonly used accidentals: the flat, the sharp, and the natural. Check out this little piece of music. I'll be starting on an A flat, going up to A natural, up to A sharp, back down to A natural, and in the third measure I'm using A natural. Notice I do not need the natural symbol on the last measure. That is because the laws of music state that the power of the flat or sharp is only in effect for 1 measure. This measure contains A and only A. There is no reason to put a natural symbol in front of the note unless, as a composer, you wanted to be courteous and remind the performer that he has to play A natural. To do so, you place the accidental in parentheses. Then it is called a courtesy accidental. If we apply what we have learned to your guitar, we can find the A note on the 2nd fret of string 3, the G string. A flat would be on the 1st fret of that G string. You have moved down by 1 fret by 1/2 step. If you return to A on fret 2, you have raised that note right back by 1/2 step. When you play a note 1 fret higher, 1/2 step higher, you would be playing A sharp. In the little piece of music to follow, I have used a courtesy accidental in the 3rd measure, although it is not necessary. And why did it have to be a courtesy accidental, you may ask? Because the powers of an accidental are only in effect for 1 measure. The A sharp accidental in the previous measure is completely forgotten about with the end of that measure. He has no power in the next measure. Now that we understand how sharps and flats work, it would be a good idea to examine the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale makes reading and studying music much easier. The chromatic scale is the name given to the scale that plays each and every note in music, one at a time in order. We could start playing a chromatic scale on any note, but for this lesson, let's start on the A note, the first letter of the musical alphabet and the most logical place to begin. As you look at the chromatic scale on the musical staff, you will notice the pitches get higher during the ascending portion of the scale because the notes are being sharped. As the music gets lower in pitch during the descending portion of the scale, notes are being flatted. Every note in the chromatic scale is separated by 1/2 step. There are 2 very important things for you to know about the chromatic scale. The first is that between B and C and E and F, there is no black key. That means that from B to C is a 1/2 step, and from E to F is also a half step. The other very important thing about the chromatic scale is that some notes have two names. These are called enharmonic spellings. For example, look here, where I'm starting on A, my next note a half step higher is A sharp. My next note, still a half step higher, is B. If I were to descend from B one half step, I would be going down a half step to B flat. These two note names then, A sharp and B flat, point to the same note. They are in fact the same note. That's called an enharmonic spelling. It means there are two ways of naming the same note.